even remember what's in this box again. Oh, this is the box of projects I never finished. That's right, I forgot about all this stuff. It's not like, you know, last year I spent several weeks printing an entire set of T-45 power armor from the Fallout series with the plans to finish it, that I then put in a box in the corner of my garage and completely forgot about for about a year. So I guess it's time we finish it, eh?
Well, it's starting to warm up out here. It was 12 degrees this morning before I turned the heater on. Winter's finally here, and we are finally continuing on with the Power Armor build series. That's right, the first part of this was almost a year ago, and we're finally moving on to part 2. What happened? Well, first things first, one thing I learned last year was don't bite off more than you can chew. Previously, the biggest project I had done on this channel was a set of Mandalorian armor I made for myself. And looking back on that, that was actually quite a simple build. All the 3D printed parts, I just sprayed them with some bed liner, painted them, did a little bit of weathering, and they just Velcroed to a set of coveralls. Nothing really fancy involved with building that set. So I figured, hey, that wasn't too bad. Let's do something big on the channel this year. And I went and I dove right in and printed an entire set of T-45 power armor from the Fallout series or game. After I had printed everything, I did that first video, I realized I bit off way more than I could chew. This was a project that was going to be a lot more involved. I had 3 boxes of 3D printed parts, like 50 pounds of plastic almost, in printing this suit. And then I realized I don't have the time, the room, or the drive at the time to finish this the way I wanted it to be finished. I wanted this to look good. I didn't want to half-ass it. I wanted this to be a proper project. So I put it on a shelf. I figured I'd come back to it, and it just kind of sat there for a year. And during that year, I learned some tricks. I started following some more people that do cosplay. I started watching some videos, started getting some more inspiration, and now we're finally moving on with continuing this series. And I was smart, where I actually finished a few parts before I started filming stuff, so I at least have some stuff buffered and ready to go as we start completing the set of T-45 power armor. And today's video, we are going to focus on the helmet. And as you can see here, this is the helmet I showed in the last video. This is the exact same helmet. And remember how I said I had some stuff already completed? Well, good thing we're not using that one anymore. Here's the completed helmet. So why do I have 2 helmets? Well, it's quite simple. This now broken helmet, it sucked. First lesson, don't be afraid to reprint something. This helmet was printed in multiple parts, just like this one, but I didn't really take the time to look at the parts while I was printing them. I just threw them on the print bed and okay, that's good enough, and I printed. So a lot of the parts that I printed for this helmet were printed in orientations that later on when I start handworking stuff will make things a lot more difficult. Lots of steps with layer lines, some stuff wasn't supported right, some areas had way more support than it needed. When you have support, no matter what your settings are, you're still gonna have scars on the surface. That's gonna take time to handwork. So this wasn't really optimized. Another thing I learned too is this helmet, the STLs came as multiple different parts, and I have multiple different printers, and some of them have a pretty decent print volume. So when you are printing a project and it has multiple parts, think of it this way. Instead of spending the time to glue 2 different parts together, aligning everything up, and then having to Bondo and fill all the seams and the gaps, just use something like Windows 3D Builder or your slicer and just merge the STLs before you print them so you can print it as one single homogeneous part. That requires a lot less handwork than joining 2 different parts. So this helmet, I didn't use, obviously. We have this helmet. So this is carbon fiber PETG. I tried it for the first time. I printed most of the parts for this on my Pantheon HS3. Thank you to Pantheon for sending me this printer. And I also used the filament that they provided with the printer. And one thing I learned about the carbon fiber PETG, it's actually not very bad when it comes to handworking. I was a little worried at first because it is PETG. I'd be worried it'd be a little bit gummy. And with it having carbon fiber in it, that does mean there is carbon fiber particulates when you start sanding. Wear a mask, be safe, ventilated area. But one thing I noticed was vertical surfaces took a lot less handwork to get nice and clean and smooth than ABS. assuming it has to do with the carbon fiber fill. Once you put a few layers of primer on it and give it a sand, those near vertical surfaces got smooth very quick. So this helmet is all carbon fiber PETG. Most of the rest of the armor is still ABS ASA. I'm reusing most of the stuff that I printed last year, but I will be reprinting some parts as I come across them if I don't like the finish on them. And don't be afraid to reprint stuff, because a lot of the time it's a lot less work just to reprint the part than to try and salvage it in post-processing with tons of sanding and Bondo and primer and whatnot. And also, don't be afraid to use adaptive layer heights. If you can smooth off that contour in a slicer and it just take a little bit longer to print the thing, instead of you sitting there with a ton of sanding and Bondoing and just making it smooth by hand, let the machine do the work. You can do it overnight while you sleep, it's easy. But before we go any further, I do want to thank the sponsor of this video, Honey Raid Better Health. Oh wait, all those companies are in massive drama right now. We're gonna thank you, the viewer, because I wouldn't be able to do the things I do, create the content I create without your continued support. So if you wanna help support the channel, the content I create, and the things I do, consider becoming a channel member, a Patreon supporter, or if you're really cool, when we do our 3 times a week live streams, consider donating some memberships to others. Allows them to get videos early and lets them hang out when we do our monthly members only live streams. Cheers. So we've got everything printed now, and now we need to go ahead and put the helmet together and start making it look pretty. And first things first, there's multiple different parts. How do you join them together? Now you can use, if you're using ABS ASA, something like acetone. 3D Gloop works on a lot of different plastics. They have specific formulas for different plastics. On this, because it is PETG, what I did was I super glued the stuff together originally, just a few drops of super glue, just to make sure everything lined up first before I went in and then permanently bonded everything together. And for permanently attaching everything together, I do a very cheap scuff version of an epoxy and fiberglass kind of thing. I use this stuff. This is fiberglass tape that you use for drywall. It's relatively cheap. And then I just use cheap 2-part epoxy. I use this to cover the gap on the inside of the part, because hand working this flat would be kind of annoying. So on the inside, I'll just lay a few strips of the fiberglass, and then I cover everything with 2-part epoxy from the inside. And then on the outside, I fill any gaps and seams with Bondo or spot putty or glazing putty. And this works pretty good. It gives you a pretty robust finish. I haven't had anything on this helmet break during the whole hand working process and doing a bunch of testing and moving it around and whatnot. So it holds up pretty good. And you want a robust shell. You don't want your parts constantly on the edge of breaking while you're trying to sand them and hand work them. It gets annoying really quick. So once we got it built up, then we need to start hand working stuff. And this is the part where the more time you put in, the more you get out. And I like to follow what I call the 6-foot rule. As long as it looks good from 6 feet away or in a picture, that's good enough for me. So certain parts of the armor, the helmet, chest piece, gloves, arms, stuff that will be closer to the viewer, to the person looking at it, I spend more time on than, say, the heel of the boot. That might get 1 or 2 sanding passes, whereas this, 3, 4. It depends on how good you want your finished product to look. And also it depends on how good the settings were when you printed it and how good of a printer you printed it on. If you're printing your parts on a clapped out ender that has layer shifts everywhere, you're gonna be using a lot of Bondo and sanding. It's gonna suck. So there's that. Once you get everything sanded and smooth, I do a process where I'll put a few layers of primer filler, take a sander to it. At first, I like using a Black & Decker mouse electric sander just to knock down those high spots.
And remember, anytime you're working with sanding or painting, wear a mask. Your lungs will thank you.
And then I finish it up with sanding blocks and then hand sanding. And then if the part's a more detailed part, I'll go in and do a wet sanding pass. So once you get everything nice and smooth, I go in and I start painting. Now painting, I started doing a new method on this helmet. And that is, at first I use a cheaper metallic paint just to kind of paint everything before I start putting all the individual components on. This gives me 2 things. One, once everything's together and I do that final paint pass, if I miss a little area area, it doesn't show up as much. Also, the advantage of doing that, it really highlights any defects. So any areas that need a little bit more handwork show up really obviously when you use a cheap metallic paint, I find. And then once I put it all together, then I go and do my final paint pass. And for that, on this one, I'm using Rust-Oleum metallic paint. And then once everything's dry, let it dry for a couple days. You really want the final paint coat to set before I move on to the final process, and that's the final assembly. So on this helmet, I was kind of smart. On the Mando suit, everything's glued together. Nothing really comes apart. On this one, a lot of the parts are just kind of friction fit for now. So they just kind of wedge in there enough that they're not, you know, gonna fall out. But if I need to work on it, I could take it out. So for example, this entire arm assembly here, I can pull out with the hoses here. I'll touch on them later. These just kind of fit into position. So this allowed me to paint stuff individually, make sure all the nooks and crannies are all painted well, and then do the final assembly. And then also before doing the final assembly, I weathered everything. Weathering on this, I don't know how I'm gonna finish this suit once it's all done, but I did my base tarnish coat first. And what that involves is basically just watered down black acrylic paint with a paper towel, and you just kind of dab all the metal surfaces. This gives it a kind of tarnished look. When I get the entire suit done or near done, I'll go in and start doing more detailed stuff like rust and whatnot. But I kind of want to have a base finish for the entire suit before I start doing more detailed stuff. Also, it's a lot easier to do, I find, that final detail pass once you have the entire suit, because the last thing you want is mismatched parts. You can tell when stuff was weathered separately because you get better as you go along. By doing it all at once for that final pass, it should make the suit look more homogeneous. And then of course, there's also little spots as well that I painted by hand with just some art paint. I just use cheap dollar store paints for a lot of this stuff. You don't need to get fancy paints. Don't be going buying Citadel paints from Games Workshop for this kind of work. Just go buy cheap paint. It's good enough. You're gonna weather it anyways. And then once that's done, that's the printed parts. We have the helmet done, it's painted, it looks pretty good, but now we need to put on the non-printed stuff. So first things first, the visor is just welding visor. You can buy this stuff cheap on Amazon, buy just a sheet of it, cut it to your size, fit it in. There's the visor. For the hoses themselves are just vacuum hoses. I had an old shop vac that was broken, and so I cut the hose up, and I almost did something really bad. These hoses, I actually have air going through them. These were from a shop vac. A shop vac that I had hooked up to a CNC machine that I had cut metal and carbon fiber with. So I put it all on, and then I immediately went, oh wait, I almost screwed up here because I'm about to put fans in this. And I took everything out and cleaned it all thoroughly. The last thing you want to do is, as soon as you turn the fans on to keep you cool, is blow carbon fiber dust in your face. So if you are going to use old hoses, make sure they're clean first. Word of advice. This wire here is from an old skill saw that I found that was broken, so I just cut the wire off that and used that. And for this hose here, this is actually just braided hose, the same kind of braided hose that you use for your toilet, connecting it to the water. So I just bought a cheap piece of braided hose, cut that up, and glued that in. A lot of the gluing of components in is using 2-part epoxy, and to help it not stand out, because stuff that's transparent or clear, it looks like glue. It looks like glue. Anytime I epoxied something together in a place that it might be visible, I mixed in a little black paint just so it could look, it doesn't stand out as much. And then for the back here, as I said, these hoses blow air. As you can see, these are slip fit. Both these hoses connect via just a friction fit, and I have fans in these. These are 30mm fans, and they blow air through both hoses. I have a fan in each one of these, and they blow air up through the front of the mask, and it's enough to keep it from fogging up. It works pretty good. And to do this, I had to modify the STLs. Now the STLs for this file, they're just STLs. I don't have the actual CADs. So I quickly just went into Windows 3D Builder, and using the subtract tools and a bunch of scuffed hackery, hollowed the parts out so that we now have an air intake on the back, and both these parts are now hollow and fit a 30mm fan. And I totally on purpose sized this exactly to friction fit a 30mm fan. Totally. It it totally didn't happen to just work. And then a few drops of hot glue to hold everything together. And by the way, hot glue, awesome for projects like this because it holds stuff together pretty good. But if you realize you need to take it apart, you can just kind of peel it off. It's actually really nice for stuff like this. And that's how most of the foam on the inside is held in. You can see the foam there. So this just foamed up with, a lot of this foam is just some leftover helmet pads that I had in the basement from the Mando armor. And then some of it is just foam from like printers, like the squishy foam that some 3D printers use for protection. And then I have the wires in here. I haven't put a battery in for the fan yet. I want to use just a rechargeable battery pack. I just need to find a small enough one to fit in here. So that will power the fans. And yeah, it actually works pretty good. I need to foam it up a little bit better just so it doesn't move around as much. And then I did use this foam here is foam that you use for like pipe protection. It's like for insulating pipes. So I cut that up and that just kind of gives it a nice little neck seal. It makes it so it doesn't rub on your neck and it also seals it up so you don't see your head as much. But there we go. It's got, right now with the foam I have in it, it's pretty stable. If you've ever seen Team 45 Power Armor, there's massive shoulder pauldrons on each side of you. So it's not like I'm going to be able to move my head around a ton wearing the whole suit. With the fans, it keeps it cool enough that the lens isn't fogging up. At some point, I will put a voice modulator box in it, so my voice sounds all cool and robotic-like. But yeah, so that is the helmet in its current state. Now, another reason a lot of this is still held together with friction fit is parts like this. This lens, this is just temporary. I do want to reprint this in the future on a resin printer because I want to print a clear lens, but I want to modify this so it has an LED in it. So that's another thing I want to run off batteries in the helmet. But for now, just for looks, that works. And then also this little part here, I was so terrified that it would break at some point. This also is just friction fit held in with just a little bit of tape to wedge it in place. So that is the helmet done enough for now. As I get further in the build of the power armor, I'll probably do another finishing and detail work pass on the helmet itself once I kind of figure out the theming of the armor itself. One thing I do recommend anytime you're doing a project like this, have some lore to work off of. You don't have to write no 30-page essay about the lore of your character, but just kind of have a generic storyline behind it, because it helps a lot when it comes to how you start detailing stuff, how you start painting stuff, how stuff starts going together. Is this, you know, a former Brotherhood of Steel trooper, so the armor is all pristine? Or is this a scrounge suit of power armor somebody found in a shed and it's all rusty and dirty and not really put together right? Try and have some sort of lore behind your suit, your project, just to give it a little bit of a thematic essence. And that's it, I guess, for the helmet. Now, you're probably wondering when the next part in this series comes out. Hopefully not another year, because if you've been astute, well, there's a ripper. So that's gonna be in a video. And then also, I've got the boots done. Yeah, this is one of the boots. I got the other one on the floor there. They weigh about 4 kilograms each, and this is gonna be the next video in the series. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you wanna see more content like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the smash button, ring the bell, do all that other stuff. If you wanna help support the channel, the content I create, and the things I do, check out the links in the video description. They don't cost you anything extra, go a long way in supporting the channel. And some of those links, like Gamer Supps, use code Canuck and save 10% off your order. I'm Taylor, the Canuck creator, and it's gonna be a fun series. I'll see you in the future. Cheers.